Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when one of Hollywood's most grounded stars sits across from one of daytime TV's most relentless debaters? You get a moment that doesn't feel scripted, polished, or safe. You get tension people replay again and again. On a recent episode of The View, Emily Blunt joined the table expecting a conversation about her latest film and the changing American dream. The topic on the cards sounded simple enough. Is home ownership slowly turning into a luxury instead of a right? But the mood shifted the moment Joy Behar framed the issue as unrealistic expectations in a modern economy. Emily didn't interrupt. She listened. Then she leaned in, calmly pushing back, saying that wanting a stable home isn't entitlement, it's dignity. Joy countered quickly, arguing that markets evolve and people need to adjust. The exchange grew sharper by the minute. Applause broke out from parts of the audience. Other co-hosts sat frozen, sensing the temperature rise. Emily spoke about families priced out of neighborhoods they grew up in, about teachers and nurses renting forever, about how something fundamental had quietly slipped away. Joy challenged her privilege, asking whether Hollywood truly understands the struggle. By the time Whoopi tried to steer the discussion back, it was clear this wasn't just a policy debate. It was about fairness, security, and whether the American promise still applies to ordinary people. What followed became one of The View's most talked about moments because it hit closer to home than anyone expected.
The segment opened the way these conversations usually do, with warmth and easy laughter. Emily Blunt walked out to applause, exchanging hugs with Whoopi and a playful grin with Joy Behar. There was nothing confrontational in the air yet. If anything, it felt relaxed, almost cozy. Emily joked about juggling filming schedules with school drop-offs, and the audience laughed along, already on her side. Joy leaned in first, smiling. She praised Emily's recent performances and mentioned how refreshing it was to see actors talk openly about real life instead of just red carpets and box office numbers. Emily thanked her, clearly at ease, and the conversation drifted into how often she moves for work, how hotels can start to feel like home, and how strange it is to live out of suitcases for months at a time. That's when Whoopi gently steered things toward the day's topic. She framed it lightly, asking whether owning a home still feels like a realistic goal or more like a dream people keep postponing. Emily didn't jump into politics. She spoke personally, recalling her early years in London, renting tiny flats with drafty windows, saving slowly, believing that one day stability would come. Joy nodded at first. She shared her own stories of cramped apartments in New York, roommates, and scraping by before television money changed everything. For a moment, they were aligned, two women swapping memories of tight budgets and uncertain futures. The audience murmured in recognition. Emily emphasized how powerful that sense of eventually can be. The idea that if you work hard, stay patient, and don't give up, you'll reach a place that's yours. Not glamorous, not massive, just secure. A home where you don't worry every year about rent hikes or moving your kids again. Joy agreed, but added a qualifier. She suggested that the world has shifted, that cities evolve, that expectations have to adjust with reality. She said it kindly, without edge, almost conversational. Emily smiled and acknowledged the point, saying of course times change. She wasn't arguing for the past to return untouched. Sunny chimed in briefly, mentioning rising interest rates and zoning laws, but the tone remained friendly. This still felt like a discussion, not a debate. Emily listened carefully, nodding, choosing her words with care. She spoke about friends outside the industry, people with steady jobs who still feel stuck renting indefinitely. Teachers, nurses, young families doing everything right and still falling behind. Joy responded with a soft laugh, not dismissive but skeptical. She suggested that renting doesn't have to mean failure, that ownership has been romanticized. Emily agreed to a point. She said renting isn't shameful, but permanence matters. Having roots matters. Feeling like you belong somewhere matters. The audience clapped, not loudly, but in that steady, supportive way that signals connection. Emily noticed. She glanced toward them, then back to the table, still calm, still measured. Joy teased her gently about living in Hollywood now, about gated communities and big houses. Emily took it in stride, smiling, admitting her life now is fortunate. She didn't dodge it, but she added that privilege doesn't erase perspective. If anything, it sharpens responsibility. Whoopi watched closely, sensing the undercurrent shifting just slightly. The smiles were still there, the tone still polite, but the distance between their viewpoints was becoming clearer. Emily closed this part of the conversation by saying she wasn't offering solutions, she was asking a question. When did something once considered a basic milestone quietly turn into a luxury item, and who decided that was acceptable? Joy leaned back, folding her arms, still smiling but more guarded now. The friendly ease hadn't disappeared, but it was thinning. The conversation had moved from shared memories to competing realities, setting the stage for what was clearly coming next.
The warmth that had marked the opening moments of the conversation began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. Joy Behar leaned forward, her signature half-smile giving way to a sharper edge. She didn't attack, at least not yet, but she framed the question more pointedly. Emily, do you really think home ownership is a right in this economy? I mean, prices are skyrocketing, regulations are everywhere, and honestly, isn't it just unrealistic to expect everyone to own a house today? Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, though her posture remained composed. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I think it should be attainable, that's the difference, she said. Not everyone will own a mansion, but a modest home where your family feels secure, that should be a possibility, not a distant dream. When the system makes it nearly impossible for someone working full-time, trying to provide for their children, that's when we have a problem. Joy shook her head, a tinge of disbelief in her tone. But the system has changed, Emily. People have to adapt. Owning property isn't a guarantee anymore. There are new financial realities, and we can't just expect government policies to rescue everyone or bend to nostalgia. Emily's voice grew steadier, more insistent. I'm not talking about nostalgia, Joy. I'm talking about fairness, about basic security. It's not a handout. It's a chance to build a stable life. When rent is rising faster than wages and young people can't save enough for a down payment, it stops being a choice. That's not adapting, that's being left behind. Joy countered, leaning closer, her eyes locked on Emily's. But if you rely on the government to create that fairness, where does it end? Do we legislate affordability for every major purchase, for every city? It's a slippery slope, Emily. People have to manage their expectations, work within the system we have. The audience murmured, sensing the tension spike. Emily nodded, acknowledging Joy's point, but refusing to concede it entirely. I get that, and I agree people have to make smart choices, but what if the system itself is stacked against them? There's a difference between individual responsibility and structural barriers that make something essential nearly unreachable. That's what we need to talk about. Joy raised an eyebrow. So you're saying the system is broken, but how much of that is reality, and how much is people just expecting more than they can get? Emily's response was sharp now, though controlled. It's not an expectation, it's a right, or at least it should be. Safe, stable housing isn't a luxury, it's the foundation for everything else in life: education, health, opportunity. When that foundation is out of reach for millions, that's a societal problem, not a personal failure. The back and forth drew audible reactions from the audience, some nodding, some whispering to neighbors. Whoopi tried to interject gently, but the momentum had already shifted. Emily's passion met Joy's skepticism head-on, each statement landing like deliberate, measured punches. Joy's voice hardened slightly, a sign she was ready to escalate. So we legislate it then, make laws to force affordability. That's not reality, that's fantasy, Emily. You're romanticizing a system that doesn't exist anymore. Emily's gaze didn't falter. "I'm not romanticizing anything. I'm pointing out a crisis that doesn't get enough attention because it's easier to blame individuals than fix the system. People shouldn't have to wait decades or gamble on luck just to have a place to call home." At that moment, the energy in the studio shifted from polite discussion to charged confrontation. The co-hosts watched closely, sensing the line had been crossed. The debate was no longer friendly. It had become personal, urgent, and impossible to ignore. Emily's measured indignation met Joy's pointed realism, and the tension held everyone captive, the audience, the co-hosts, and the viewers at home. This wasn't just about housing anymore. It was about values, fairness, and what society chooses to protect. The stage was set for the next phase, the emotional flashpoint, where the stakes would feel personal and the conversation would hit its most intense, unflinching moment yet. The tension in the studio had thickened into something almost tangible. Joy Behar, her voice steady but sharper than before, leaned forward, almost daring Emily Blunt to challenge her. "Emily, I get your passion, I really do. But let's be honest, housing has never been guaranteed. Not in your lifetime, not in mine. People have always had to fight for it. Are we really saying the government has to step in for every person who can't make it work?" Emily's jaw tightened, and for a moment her eyes flashed with a quiet fire. "Joy, this isn't about handouts or stepping in for every single person. It's about basic stability, about whether people can even have a chance at a decent life without being crushed by rent or skyrocketing home prices. It's not asking for a gift, it's demanding fairness." Joy shook her head, incredulous. "Fairness? Life isn't fair, Emily. It never has been. People need to adapt, save, compromise. That's the reality of living in this world. You can't legislate fairness into existence." Emily leaned forward now, her voice controlled but rising just enough to carry urgency. "And that's exactly the problem. It's not just life being unfair, it's a system actively stacked against people trying to make it. Families working multiple jobs, young people trying to start their lives, seniors trying to retire without losing everything. They're not failing because they're lazy or careless. They're failing because the foundation they rely on is crumbling." The audience shifted in their seats. Gasps and whispers ran through the studio. Joy's face tightened. She knew Emily was striking a nerve. "Emily, with all due respect, you're romanticizing struggle. People have been dealing with this for generations. We've managed and will continue to manage. Your vision sounds nice, but it's unrealistic." Emily's voice now trembled slightly, not with anger, but with frustration and sincerity. "Unrealistic? No, Joy. What's unrealistic is pretending this is normal or acceptable. Millions of Americans are being priced out of the basic right to a home. And yes, I am angry because it's preventable and it shouldn't be happening in the richest country in the world." Joy's tone sharpened. "So we force policies to make housing fair? Where does it end, Emily? Today it's housing, tomorrow it's food prices, health care, education. Life isn't a charity case." Emily's eyes glistened, though she refused to back down. "It's not about charity. It's about responsibility, societal responsibility. When people are trapped in cycles of debt, when families are living paycheck to paycheck with no hope of owning a home, that's not luck. That's a failure of the system, and pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone." Whoopi tried to interject gently, attempting to calm the rising tension, but Emily wasn't finished. "We can't keep telling people to adapt while the rules are stacked against them. This isn't about privilege, it's about justice. It's about giving people a real chance to build a life without fear of being evicted, without fear of losing everything because the market decided they were expendable." Joy's expression softened slightly, but the debate had already reached a personal level. The studio was silent except for the hum of tension. Emily's words had cut through the pretense of civility and hit a raw nerve. She wasn't just debating statistics or policy. She was voicing the fear, frustration, and desperation that millions of Americans felt every day. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. The discussion had evolved from a polite disagreement into a confrontation that struck at values, ethics, and the very meaning of fairness. The audience felt it, the co-hosts felt it, and even Joy's carefully constructed skepticism had to confront the emotional reality Emily had laid bare. By the time Whoopi tried to steer the conversation back, the emotional energy in the room had already surged past control. This was no longer a debate about housing policy. It was a mirror held up to society's failures, and Emily Blunt's passion had made it impossible to look away. The stage was set for the final escalation, the breaking point, where the stakes would be at their highest and the conversation's impact would resonate long after the cameras stopped rolling. The studio had become electric, the tension palpable, as Emily Blunt's words from the previous segment lingered in the air. Joy Behar, visibly bristling, took a breath and leaned forward, her fingers tapping the table. "Emily, I hear you, I do, but let's get real here. The government can't fix every problem. Not everyone is meant to own a home. That's just life. Some people rent, some people move, some people adapt. That's the reality. You're making it sound like the system is deliberately cruel, and I think that's a stretch." Emily's gaze didn't waver. "A stretch, Joy? We're talking about millions of people who can't even dream of home ownership because wages haven't kept up with skyrocketing prices. This isn't a matter of adapting, it's a matter of survival. Families are working multiple jobs, taking on debt they can never repay, all while landlords and investors profit from their hardship. That's not life being unfair, it's a system failing them." The tension ratcheted higher. The co-hosts exchanged uneasy glances. The audience sat forward, sensing the debate was no longer about polite disagreement, but raw, emotional truth. Joy's voice sharpened. "Emily, you're talking about sweeping changes, but where does it stop? Today it's housing, tomorrow it's healthcare, food, transportation. Life isn't fair, and it's not the government's job to make it easy. People have to take responsibility for their own lives." Emily leaned forward, her voice firm, cutting through the studio's hum. "Responsibility? People are responsible, Joy. They work, they save, they plan. But what happens when the system itself is rigged against them? When a single market crash can wipe out a lifetime of savings? When rents rise faster than any paycheck? When a home is no longer a place of security, but a symbol of exclusion? Responsibility isn't enough when the rules are stacked against you." The audience murmured in agreement, some even audibly gasping at Emily's intensity. Joy's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of hesitation. Emily was striking a nerve. "You think this is just about empathy, Emily, but it's economics, supply and demand, incentives. You can't just legislate fairness into existence," Joy said, her voice tinged with exasperation. Emily's eyes glimmered with conviction. "No, Joy, it's about morality and justice. You can't claim economics as an excuse for systemic failure. You can't tell people to adapt while their futures are being auctioned off. Home ownership isn't a privilege, it's a basic building block of stability, of opportunity, of dignity. And when that's stripped away for millions of Americans, it's not economics, it's a crisis." For a moment, the room was silent. Even the co-hosts, usually quick to interject, seemed caught in the intensity. Emily's words had transcended debate. They were a rallying cry, a mirror reflecting the daily struggles of countless Americans. Joy leaned back, her lips pressed in a thin line, but the fire in Emily's voice had made an undeniable mark. I see your point, Emily," she said cautiously, "but the solution isn't simple, and it certainly isn't overnight." Emily's voice softened just enough to convey the weight of what she was saying. "I don't expect overnight. I expect awareness. I expect acknowledgement. I expect action. Because if we don't confront this, we're telling millions that they don't matter, that their dreams are not worth fighting for. And that's not the country I want to live in." The studio was quiet, the intensity hanging like a charged cloud over the panel. The debate had moved past facts and policy into something deeper, values, fairness, the very fabric of society. The breaking point had been reached, and Emily Blunt's passionate insistence on justice had made it impossible to turn away. As the cameras cut to commercial, the audience remained stunned, whispers of agreement and reflection echoing through the studio. The confrontation had left its mark, not just on the debate itself, but on everyone watching. The stakes had never been higher, and the truth of Emily's words lingered. Homeownership was no longer a guaranteed right. It had become a fight, a struggle, and for many, a distant dream. As the cameras pulled back and the studio lights softened, the tension from the debate still lingered like a charged current. Emily Blunt sat quietly for a moment, letting her words sink in, not just for the co-hosts, but for the millions watching at home who had felt the weight of her argument. The conversation had started as a policy discussion, but it had evolved into something far more profound, a reflection of the struggles, hopes, and frustrations of everyday Americans. Joy Behar, still bristling from the clash, leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Even she couldn't ignore the raw emotion and undeniable conviction Emily had brought to the table. For a moment, the sharp edges of disagreement softened into acknowledgement. It was clear that this wasn't about celebrity versus journalist, nor about politics versus empathy. It was about human lives, families striving for stability, and a society wrestling with what fairness truly meant. The audience, caught in the intensity of the discussion, remained silent, some nodding in agreement, others reflecting on their own experiences with housing, debt, and opportunity. For them, the debate had become more than just television. It was validation of struggles often overlooked, a mirror showing the everyday battles fought quietly behind closed doors. Emily's closing words, spoken softly but firmly, carried a resonance that couldn't be ignored. Home ownership is more than an investment. It's security, it's dignity, it's the foundation for future generations. When it becomes a luxury rather than a right, we're sending a message about what we value, about who gets to dream and who gets left behind. And that's not a message we can accept. Joy nodded slowly, perhaps not fully convinced, but undeniably moved by the gravity of Emily's perspective. The clash had been fierce, but it had also been necessary, an honest confrontation that exposed the realities many face and forced the nation to look inward. As the show wrapped, the impact of the conversation lingered. Viewers at home were left questioning, debating, and perhaps, most importantly, empathizing. Emily Blunt had not just argued a point, she had ignited a dialogue, reminding everyone that policy and profit cannot outweigh human dignity. In the end, the episode was a testament to the power of truth, passion, and courage. It was a reminder that when issues of fairness and opportunity are at stake, silence is not an option. For millions of Americans, home ownership is no longer guaranteed. But thanks to this conversation, their voices, their struggles, and their hopes were seen and heard. It was a moment of television that transcended entertainment, becoming a mirror for society, a spark for conversation, and a call to action, a reminder that the fight for what is right is never truly over.